The night Marcus Hale buttoned his suit alone in a dim apartment, the silence felt louder than any crowd. The mirror reflected a man who had learned to stand straight even when the ground kept giving way. Creases at the corners of his eyes, a tie he hadn't worn in years, and a heart bracing itself for a wedding that would remind him of everything he'd lost and everything he still carried. He wasn't just going to a ceremony. He was walking into a room full of pears, memories, and questions he could never quite answer without tightening his jaw. Before the story unfolds any further, pause with me for a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that show up when we least expect them, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Marcus lived in a modest town outside Columbus, Ohio, where the houses sat close enough to share shadows but far enough apart to keep secrets. He had been a single father for 5 years, raising his son Noah, after illness took Marcus's wife far too early. Life had shrunk into routines that fit between school drop-offs, late-night laundry, and the steady hum of responsibility. Weddings were events he avoided because they reopened a chapter he had learned to read without turning the pages. But this wedding belonged to his younger cousin, a reminder of beginnings rather than endings, and he promised he would show up. The drive to the venue felt longer than it was. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other on a folded note Noah had slipped into his jacket pocket that morning, a child's handwriting reminding him to smile and eat cake. He parked near the entrance and watched couples spill out of their cars, laughter floating ahead of them like music he had forgotten the words to. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and told himself that being alone didn't mean being empty. The ceremony hall glowed with warm lights and fresh flowers, the kind of beauty that makes people breathe slower. Marcus took a seat near the back, where he could observe without being observed. He smiled when appropriate, clapped when the room clapped, and kept his grief folded neatly inside. When the vows ended, he felt the familiar ache that came when love was celebrated publicly. It wasn't envy, it was longing mixed with gratitude, a complicated knot he had learned to carry. At the reception, Marcus navigated conversations with distant relatives who spoke in careful tones, as if he might shatter. He nodded through stories about Noah growing fast, about time healing everything, about how good it was to see him out. He smiled and excused himself often, stepping outside to breathe. That was when his phone buzzed with a notification from the babysitter, a picture of Noah asleep on the couch, thumb tucked under his chin. Marcus smiled fully for the first time that night. Across town, someone else stood at a window watching the same moon. Her name was Rachel Collins, and she lived 2 doors down from Marcus. She had moved into the neighborhood a year earlier with boxes stacked too high and eyes that carried their own history. Rachel was a school counselor, the kind who listened more than she spoke, the kind who noticed when someone held themselves together with quiet determination. She had watched Marcus from a distance, how he carried groceries with one hand while holding Noah's with the other, how he fixed the porch step without asking for help, how he waved politely but never lingered. Rachel had been invited to the same wedding through a colleague, but she had declined, citing paperwork in an early morning. The truth was simpler. She didn't like rooms that echoed with reminders of what she hadn't allowed herself to want yet. Still, when she saw Marcus's lights go out earlier than usual and his car leave the driveway, something tugged at her. She recognized the suit he wore. She had seen it hanging in his closet when he'd left the door open one afternoon. She felt a strange urgency, as if a moment were moving without her and she had a chance to catch it. Back at the reception, the dance floor filled. Marcus stayed near the edge, nursing a glass of water and watching joy swirl past him. He told himself he was content. He told himself this was enough. And then, as if the night itself had decided to test him, he heard a familiar voice cutting through the music from the entrance of the hall. It was not a whisper or a polite call. It was a shout filled with courage and a tremor of hope, a voice calling for attention with 3 words that seemed to rearrange the air. People turned, heads tilted. Marcus turned too, disbelief flickering across his face as he saw Rachel standing there, breathless, eyes shining with something that looked a lot like resolve. She hadn't planned this well. She hadn't planned it at all. She had driven on instinct, parked without checking her reflection, and followed a pull she couldn't explain. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and expectations, she felt more certain than she had in years. Rachel crossed the room, ignoring curious glances, her steps steady even as her heart raced. She stopped in front of Marcus, who looked like a man waking from a long sleep. The music softened. The room seemed to hold its breath. Rachel didn't speak in rehearsed lines or borrowed wisdom. She simply stood there, present and unguarded, letting the truth of the moment do the work. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a door creaking open where there had been none. They stepped outside together, not to escape the room but to breathe. The night air was cool, the stars sharp. They talked the way people do when they're tired of pretending, about loss and responsibility, about learning to be strong when no one is watching, about the strange comfort of being seen without explanation. Marcus admitted how hard it was to show up alone, how he carried Noah's world on his shoulders and forgot sometimes that he was allowed to want something too. Rachel shared how she had built walls carefully, brick by brick, until she forgot what they were protecting her from. Inside, the celebration continued. Outside, something quieter and more powerful took shape. It wasn't romance born of spectacle, it was recognition. It was the relief of finding someone who understood the weight you carry and offered to help without trying to lift it away. When Marcus returned home later that night, he tucked Noah into bed and sat on the edge for a while, listening to his son breathe. He realized that courage had shown up for him in an unexpected form, loud enough to cut through music and doubt. Over the weeks that followed, Rachel became a regular presence, not as a replacement for what Marcus had lost, but as a companion to what he was building. She helped with homework, cheered at soccer games, and learned the rhythms of their lives without rushing them. The challenges didn't vanish. There were awkward moments, slow steps, and fears that resurfaced at inconvenient times. Marcus worried about introducing change into Noah's world. Rachel worried about loving a family and not just a man. But they chose honesty over haste, patience over fear. They learned that healing isn't a straight line. It's a series of brave moments stitched together by trust. Seasons changed. The neighborhood noticed. The porch light stayed on later. Laughter returned to the yard. Marcus found himself smiling without checking first if it was allowed. Rachel found herself wanting a future she could imagine clearly, and Noah, perceptive as children are, felt the difference before anyone said a word. He felt safer, lighter, and more hopeful, as if the world had quietly agreed to be kinder. If this story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you that love can arrive when you're not looking and courage can come from unexpected places, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs reassurance, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement tells us these stories matter. And before we reach the end, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. On the anniversary of the wedding, Marcus and Rachel stood in the same hall, this time as guests who knew what it meant to show up fully. Marcus squeezed Rachel's hand, grateful not just for her presence but for the moment she had chosen to step into his life without guarantees. He understood now that being alone once didn't define him forever. Sometimes all it takes is one brave voice cutting through the noise, reminding you to look up, to be seen, and to believe again.